Hello everyone and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, April 11th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief, Peter Sciretta. Joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor, Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Renner, Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Renner, Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
Okay, so this morning was the Hotelpocalypse. This is the thing that happens every year for Comic-Con where everybody, not just press, but everybody hoping to be in San Diego for Comic-Con tries to get a hotel. And it's a very stressful thing. I think we survived. We have not found out if we have gotten any hotel yet. But does anybody have any thoughts on the Hotelpocalypse?
I have a question for you, Peter, since you've been doing Comic-Con for a lot longer than I have, which is, in the days before it was a lottery system, the days before it was more tightly regulated, back when it was like a true Wild West, first come, first served system, do you prefer that chaos versus the organized big question mark of this now?
Oh, I prefer that because at least back then, it was all about being competent and who was the first to fill out the form would get the best hotel room. So if you had your shit together, you would actually get a hotel room. And that's what actually kind of bothers me of, like, you know, Star Wars Celebration is going on starting today. And to get into those panels, you had to enter a lottery system. It's by pure chance you get in there. At least, you know, the way it used to be, if you were willing to wait long enough in advance and put in the time and the effort, you would guarantee yourself in there. Now it's just a crapshoot. So, I don't know. I prefer, even though, like, I'm not saying I prefer to wait in lines. I'm saying I prefer there to be some skill or effort and less chance.
Yeah, I think there's a happy medium to be found because, like, for example, attending other film festivals is harder for me now because Fantastic Fest has a lottery system of sorts for your daily schedule where an algorithm tries to piece together everybody's preferences and make sure everybody gets most of what they want. And it's a wonderful thing. And I like seeing a similar line of thought being applied to larger events with these massive crowds so that people, you know, don't have to, you know, bust their butts too hard. But at the same time, you're right. I feel like someone like us who needs a room so we can make sure the site gets coverage, it hurts a lot for us not to be prepared for that. But actually, I want to hear from Chris and Ben real quick because they're the ones who've sworn off Comic-Con for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it both ways, right? Like, I've seen some people in Peter's Twitter mentions talking about how a lottery system is beneficial for people who, like, have disabilities, for example, like for people who it's really difficult for them to sleep overnight or whatever. So I understand it from that angle.
But in that example does not hold true because people with disabilities get into Comic-Con in a special line that gets them in before anybody else.
That might be true. I mean, I think I'm probably closer to Chris's total opinion on this whole thing, and I'll let him share that because he shared it with us in the Slack channel earlier. But I assume that's what he's going to say right now.
I mean, I would prefer all of this goes away. I just feel like this like sucks the energy out of everything. Like, I really like Star Wars. I'm not like a fanatic, but I'm a big Star Wars fan, especially of the new movies. But just thinking about this celebration, I'm not even there, but just thinking about all this crap is making me be like, I don't want to ever hear about Star Wars ever again. I just feel like this really, it deflates it just boils it down to this, like, I don't know. It's not fun. Like, nothing's fun about this. Like, I want to, you know, I like movies because I enjoy them. I don't want to think about, like, waiting in lines and getting into a room in time. It's just, I don't know. But that's me. I know some people live for this shit, so more power to them.
Chris, you got to show you care in some way. You got to wait in the lines.
I care when I see the movie, and then I talk about the movie.
And last time, people that waited in lines, Rian Johnson came out overnight and, like, went down the line to every single person, took photos with them.
Yeah, and look what that got him. Now everyone yells at him on Twitter until he dies. So It was all for nothing.
Okay, we spent 5 minutes on lines and Comic-Con. Let's move into the news. Or actually, before we get into the news, I just want to mention that I did appear on Collider's Movie Talk, which is airing today. I taped it yesterday, so if you know what that is, check that out. You can see me on video, and not just my voice. Okay, let's move into the news. Let's first talk about something that hit last night, and this is that Donald Glover's movie is surprise dropping on Amazon Prime this weekend? What do we know, Ben?
Yeah, so Donald Glover and Rihanna are co-starring in a movie called Guava Island. They shot it last summer in Cuba, and all of a sudden, last night we got word that Amazon Prime Video picked it up in a bidding war situation when the movie was still in post-production. And yes, they're going to be releasing it online on Amazon Prime starting like Friday at midnight, like Saturday morning at 12:01 a.m. Pacific time. The cool thing about this is that for the first 18 hours of its availability, you don't even have to subscribe to Amazon Prime to watch it. Just anybody with an internet connection can I've linked it in the article that we wrote at Slash Film. So if you want to figure out how to get there, you can click through and bookmark the page or whatever. But anybody can watch it until 6 p.m. on Saturday. So
is this a full-length feature film?
I just found out through an article at Vanity Fair that this movie is actually 1 hour long, but it's like a musical. There's music as an element of it, which you would expect considering Glover and Rihanna are both musicians as well as actors. But it's a tropical thriller that is sort of inspired by movies like City of God and Prince's Purple Rain. And Donald Glover plays a musician who's living in Cuba who is determined to throw a festival for his island community. So that's the basic setup of this thing. And it's called Guava Island. It comes out very, very soon.
And the director of this is someone really cool, right, Ben?
Oh, yeah. Hiro Murai is directing this. He's like an up-and-coming filmmaker. He's directed a bunch of episodes of shows like Atlanta and Barry, and he directed the This Is America video for Donald Glover's musician alter ego, Childish Gambino, last year.
Yeah, he's a great director. The first couple episodes of Barry this year, I think, are directed by him. I've been seeing his name on the screen. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on to Child's Play. I know Chris is kind of excited for this movie, maybe not. But the remake has scored a interesting composer. Chris, tell us about it.
Yes, my feelings about the Child's Play remake are complicated. I was initially 100% against it, but I've been slowly coming around to begrudgingly admitting that it might be okay. And that has to do with they just keep announcing really cool talent involved with the film. It has a really cool cast. Mark Hamill is doing the voice of Chucky now. And now Bear McCreary, who is a composer who's done music for The Walking Dead, and he did a really great soundtrack for 10 Cloverfield Lane. He has been hired to do the score for this film, and he posted a video of himself playing, I guess, what is the new theme for the new Child's Play. And in keeping with the film's storyline, which involves toys, obviously, he put together a quote unquote toy orchestra. So he's got all these instruments that are like toy instruments, like a toy piano and all this stuff, and that's what he's using to compose some of the music for the film. And that's a nice touch. I like his music. So at the very least, this film will have a good cast and a good soundtrack. I don't know about everything else, but those elements will probably be sound.
I think he's such a fascinating composer. Has anyone else here watched the new Battlestar Galactica from about 10 years ago?
Yeah, no, I think that's when he kind of made his name in 2004 with that. And he did some TV after that, like Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. He did Walking Dead, that infamous theme there. And he also did Black Sails, which I liked. I think probably my favorite thing from him is probably 10 Cloverfield Lane. And I did like what he actually did with Dan Trachtenberg's his Black Mirror episode. He did like something that was more kind of like video gamey for that. I'm wondering, Jacob, what is your favorite thing that he's done?
I mean, I think his versatility is what makes him amazing, but this Battlestar theme for me is an all-timer. I mean, for those of you who have not seen that show, rather than go with a traditional Star Wars-esque, orchestral thing, it's very percussion heavy. It's very subdued at times, and watching these space battles that are essentially scored by pounding drums in this almost tribal way is not something I expected to like as much as I do, but it's a really inspired choice.
Ben, do you have any favorite of his scores?
I really enjoyed the 10 Cloverfield Lane thing as well. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen of him, because I haven't really dipped into Walking Dead since like the first season. And I still haven't seen Battlestar yet, but yeah.
And he also does some video game soundtracks. He did Assassin's Creed Syndicate. He did God of War. Chris, I'm assuming you're going to also say 10 Cloverfield Lane?
Yeah, I said that actually when we started. And he even did the soundtrack for the terrible Cloverfield Paradox. And even though that movie is awful, his soundtrack for it is really cool. So he's one of those people who like he does soundtracks you can listen to without actually enjoying the film. So that's always in my mind the sign of a good composer.
Yeah, and his next film to hit theaters is Godzilla King of the Monsters, so I'm looking forward to that as well. Okay, let's move on to our next story. I got a chance to talk to the Russo brothers last week at the Avengers Endgame junket. Since they didn't want to really talk about the movie much, I kind of asked them questions that they could answer, one of which was why did they lie about this Avengers Endgame title? So let's rewind here. Before Avengers Infinity War came out, Kevin Feige was quoted on as saying the reason why they haven't released the title for Avengers 4 was because it was a spoiler for Infinity War. So that, of course, all the fans, the speculation just kicked into high gear, and especially after Infinity War hit theaters, that speculation even intensified. And I think, Jacob, even the day after Infinity War hit theaters, you were on this podcast and you theorized that the name of the movie would be Avengers Endgame, based on a line of dialogue in the film spoken by Doctor Strange. So I think you were kind of on the cusp of this, and many people speculated that, and I think Uproxx asked the Russos in an interview, is the title of the fourth Avengers film ever spoken in Infinity War? To which Joe Russo responded, no. And so when the title was actually eventually announced as Avengers Endgame, I think some fans and some journalists were both a little miffed that the filmmakers basically lied. So I asked the Russo brothers if they did lie and why they lied. And basically, Anthony Russo responded jokingly that no one ever said Avengers Endgame in the movie. So, technically they didn't lie. And Joe, you can read the full quote. I'll link it in the show notes. But he basically explained that, this was a year before the movie was released, and we are constantly changing things. And these are iterative, creative processes. It is impossible to commit to anything with any clarity a year before you're about to release some content. And he goes on to say that basically that as creatives, they should be given the room to release, to be able to talk about that stuff whenever they want and not be pressured into choices in the same way that a writer wants to feel like they're getting accurate answers out of us. There's no accurate answers a year out. So I guess the question here is this kind of bullshit? Because on one hand,
yes,
it is.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about this, Chris?
No, they're just for one. So here's the thing. I actually don't think filmmakers owe it to anyone to tell the truth. I remember, or even actors, I remember when The Dark Knight Rises came out, for years, Marion Cotillard was saying, "Oh, I'm not playing Talia," even though we all knew she was. And then it came out and it proved that she was. Everyone was like, "Oh, she lied." It's like, who cares? It's not like, she's under oath. It's not like she's a member of the United States government. And the same thing goes with the Russo brothers. It's okay if you're lying about movies.
Is it? I don't think it's okay.
I do.
Well, here's my point. I know Jacob probably has something to say about this, but when someone goes to J.J. Abrams and is like, is Benedict Cumberbatch playing Khan in Star Trek Into Darkness, now you're putting that filmmaker in a corner, and that's a big reveal in that movie. And yes, it's okay for him to lie. It's okay for, the Dark Knight lie to happen. I think you want to protect the story for the fans. That I totally get. But in a world where we are being lied to, and I don't want to make this super serious because we're talking about superhero movies here, but in a world where we're being lied to, on TV every day by politicians that, govern our world, it's sad that we're getting lied to about a title that, I mean,
well, let me add this caveat.
Well, if the Russo brothers were asked, there is a much clever way to answer this question. If I were the Russo brothers and I was asked, is the title in Infinity War, I'd be like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Or I could answer, we can't talk about the title. We're not thinking about that quite yet. There's ways of answering that question without lying to the press.
I agree. And I actually want to add that even though I don't think it's a big deal when you lie about a movie, I also think the Marvel system in general acts just a little too crazy about their spoilers. They really could have just given us that title right after Infinity War. It really wouldn't have changed anything. And I do think they take the spoiler culture just a little bit too seriously. So it's like a double-edged sword. I don't think it's a big deal, but I also feel like Marvel needs to lighten up just ever so slightly.
Jacob, what are your thoughts on this subject?
I feel like I fall somewhere between you two because, as Peter alluded to, it is literally my job to care about this stuff. It's my job to care about this stuff so average folks can get away from the regular world and read about movies. It's my job to care about what the title of Avengers movie is so I can ensure that we run a good movie website. that is my job, so I have to care. And I think Kevin Feige is an example of doing this right. If you ask Kevin Feige a question he doesn't want to answer, as Peter can attest, he'll give you an answer that's genuinely satisfying, good to read, sounds great, but doesn't answer a damn question one bit whatsoever. He's skilled at it. Whereas the Russos and J.J. Abrams, even though they love preserving mysteries, they aren't. So I think that Kevin Feige is the case example of how you dodge questions while still satisfying the press and satisfying people who want to know this stuff and who care about this stuff. I think there's a fine line. I really wish the Russos had just smiled and said, we're not going to talk about that, as opposed to saying an untruth. That's it. But at the same time, yeah, it's silly. It's silly for a regular person to care about this. But for me and Peter, this is our lives. This is our career. So yeah, I care about it.
Well, the other part of this, Jacob, is when you have a filmmaker that is willing to lie for their movies, then you ask them questions about other stuff. You don't know what could possibly be a lie and what could be the truth. Do you know what I mean? What is the value in what they're saying in that interview after that?
Ben, you have an opinion on this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think what Peter just brought up is my only problem with the whole thing. Is if you're lying to preserve a secret, then it kind of can call the entire rest of the whole thing into question. And I guess that just means you only get to talk to people about stuff that's already out, and then you can trust their answers because it's already out and done, and the surprise has been released on the world. But yeah, I don't know. I think you guys have covered all the big touch points here.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that I'm not this isn't something that I'm super upset about. I don't care that they lied about the Avengers 4 title. But doing this for a living, it did. I feel like there was a better way that they could have handled this. I do think when you do put a filmmaker in a corner where it's something that they don't want to reveal, and you're basically putting them in that corner that they have to reveal, you have to lie. That is total. I am behind that 100%. J.J. Abrams was in his full right to lie about Khan. He wasn't in his full right to make that decision that was going to be a big twist, because that was stupid. But he was in his full right to lie when people asked about it. But okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Avengers Endgame, because this film is, one of the highest selling movies of all time for pre-ticket sales. Ben, how well is this doing thus far?
Yeah, in the first week of pre-sales, Fandango says that Avengers Endgame has sold 5 times as many tickets as Infinity War, which is the movie that, as of right now, holds the domestic record for the biggest opening weekend ever. According to Atom Tickets, ATOM, Atom Tickets, they said that Avengers Endgame has sold twice as many tickets in the first week as the next 4 record holders combined. And those movies are Aquaman, Star Wars The Last Jedi, Avengers Infinity War, and Captain Marvel. So that's a pretty impressive statistic right there. And yeah, I'm guessing this movie is going to make, spoiler alert, a lot of money when it opens at the box office.
Here's my question to you guys, because this is obviously going to be the #1 movie of the summer. We have not recorded our summer movie wager yet with the /Filmcast that's coming up, but this is going to be included. And I don't think there's any way that this isn't going to be #1. But what I'm wondering is, this is selling 5 times more tickets than Infinity War. How big of a worldwide box office do you think this is going to do? Do you think that this has the potential to actually overtake Avatar or Titanic at the worldwide record box office?
It will beat their opening for sure, and it'll be the next $1 movie from Marvel. But the difference between Marvel and Avatar is that Avatar played for a long, long time. It opened late enough in the year for it to play into the dry months of January, February, March, where no one could top it. Same with Titanic in many ways. And Marvel films, they're very front-loaded. It's going to make a crap ton of money. People are going to probably really enjoy it. But there's so much summer competition that it's going to maybe crest that $2 billion mark and stop.
Let me give you the numbers here before we get more commentary on this. Avengers: Infinity War is the number 4 biggest film of all time with $2.048 billion. It was like $20 million from overtaking Force Awakens. Then above that, you have to go up like another $120 million to beat Titanic. And then from there, you got to go up, I think like $600 million to beat Avatar, which is that nearly $2.8 billion worldwide. So I guess my big question here is, Infinity War was, a big event film at the end of 10 years of Marvel history. And like, this film seems like more of a sequel than ever before. Like, I don't feel like you can go into this film without having seen Infinity War. So like, is this movie going to do a lot more money than Infinity War made? Do you know what I mean? Because like, I feel like you need to have people have had to have seen Infinity War to see Endgame.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to make a lot more than Infinity War, but I don't know if it's ever going to touch Avatar. I'm curious what Chris thinks about this. Do you think that there's any way that, because Avatar was sort of like so broad in its story that it played really well globally, do you think there's any way that worldwide this movie is going to come close to Avatar?
I think this is going to be a box office flop. I don't know what you guys are talking about. No, I really don't know. It seems like the hype for this is so extreme. Like I assumed the hype would be big, but it's even bigger than I was expecting. So I think maybe, I really don't know. But like Jacob said, Avatar had that, that added bonus of coming out. I think it was like near Christmas, or at least I saw it near Christmas. So it was in theaters for a long amount of time, whereas the summer season is pretty crowded. I mean, I don't think anything else is going to be as big as Endgame is this summer, but there is going to be more competition for it than Avatar had. So I really don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like, I feel like with these big event films, you need to see them to be part of the conversation. And I think some people that skipped out on Infinity War and didn't show up at the theater, I feel like are going to feel the need to actually have to see Endgame in the theaters before they get spoiled. So we'll have to see. It'll be interesting to see how much of a financial impact this has on the box office. But let's move on to TV. Later today, Disney is kind of rolling out their Disney Plus streaming service. And one of the things we learned yesterday is that one of these shows is going to be a Hawkeye TV series, a live-action Hawkeye TV series starring Jeremy Renner. Chris, what do we know about this?
Yeah, it's basically what you just said. Jeremy Renner is going to jump from the big screen to the small screen with Disney Plus's Hawkeye series, and the series is also going to feature a comic book fan favorite, Kate Bishop, who also becomes Hawkeye. He hands the mantle of Hawkeye off to that character, and the show is going to be about him training her. And there's already been some speculation that Kate Bishop is going to be a character in Endgame. There's that shot in the trailer where Hawkeye's training a female character to shoot an arrow, but some have also speculated that might be one of his kids grown up. But in any case, it feels like this is also a sign to indicate that no matter what happens in Endgame, Hawkeye is going to survive because he has his own TV show now. So that's something that I guess has been spoiled. So thank you, Disney Plus. You gave away the game.
Well, it could be a prequel. We don't know if he trained Kate Bishop in between, the time between, I guess.
The snap, in between the snap. Maybe. I feel like that's like the answer everyone uses now. Like, oh, how does Spider-Man Far From Home work? It could be a prequel. It's just like that answer is going to get old after a while.
I do think some of these TV shows are going to be prequels, though. This one definitely sounds like it's not going to be. Jacob, do you have any thoughts on a Hawkeye TV series?
I do, which is that for the most part, the Marvel movies have dropped the ball on Hawkeye in a major way. Jeremy Renner does not seem very engaged most of the time. The movies generally don't give him much to do. He spends most of the first Avengers movie just being a mind-controlled villain. The only writer who really tapped into what makes Hawkeye interesting is Joss Whedon with Avengers Age of Ultron, where he kind of became the emotional core of the movie as the normal guy who is continuously flabbergasted by the fact that he is on the Avengers. And there's a great scene near the end of the movie, a movie that's very underrated, by the way, where he's doing a big pump-up speech to Scarlet Witch saying, I'm in a floating city surrounded by robots. I'm armed with a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense. And that's what I want out of Hawkeye. And that's what makes Hawkeye so great in the Marvel comics, is that he's an incredibly normal human being, not even as like skillful as Black Widow, who is constantly over his head, constantly in danger. A fall that wouldn't even bother Thor breaks his leg in the comic. And hearing that this is a Kate Bishop series makes you think of the Matt Fraction, David Aja run on Hawkeye from a few years ago that won a bunch of awards, sold really well. It's over now. It's all complete, collected in one volume. You should read it.
It's so good. Read it. Like, seek this out.
Yeah. It may be my favorite superhero comic of all time, or at least it's up there with Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. It's that good. And the basic whole gist of that comic is it follows the parallel stories of Clint Barton and Kate Bishop as they go about their various Hawkeye adventures. And it really narrows down on the idea of Hawkeye being involved in incredibly grounded, normal human stories where he walks away from a car chase, incredibly bruised up. He spends the next couple of issues wearing bandages. And I want that. I want a series that not only has Kate Bishop, who's a great character, but acknowledges just how frail and mortal Hawkeye is and how his real superpower is not bows and arrows, but the fact that he manages to keep getting back up and keep on fighting alongside gods and superhumans.
The thing I like about these Disney Plus TV series is, and Chris, I think you mentioned this a couple weeks ago on the podcast, that Patrick H. Willems had this video essay on what he doesn't like about the MCU, and one of the things he brings up is kind of like this illusion of change that is something that Stan Lee created in the comics, and in these movies we're basically going big event to big event to big event, and things change, and in the next movie I think they're almost kind of retconned in many ways because there isn't much time to deal with these changes. And in the comics, you have like a year in between these big events to be with these characters and see how they react to those changes in their lives and their world. And I feel like these TV shows are going to give us a glimpse into that. It's something that we haven't been getting in the MCU, and that's why I'm kind of excited about this. But let's move on. We have a lot to talk about here. Let's talk about Grease. Grease is getting not a sequel, but a prequel. Ben, what is going on here?
So if you remember the opening scene to the 1978 movie Grease, it begins with Danny Zuko, played by John Travolta, and Sandy Olsen, played by Olivia Newton-John. They're on a beach, and they're having a great time together and talking about how this has been the best summer of their lives. And then a few minutes later into the movie, they sing this song called Summer Nights, where they recount the early days of their romance. This is before they realize that they're at the same school. Sandy, of course, is like innocent and naive, and Danny is basically bragging to his friends about how they got hot and heavy on the beach. And then that's kind of it. That's all you really need to know about the origins of Sandy and Dandy's romance. But apparently not, because now Paramount is making a movie called Summer Loving that is a prequel. It's being written by John August, who wrote the screenplays for movies like Big Fish and Go. And it's going to, I guess, just explore the fateful meeting of Danny and Sandy that crazy summer. Guys, I'm not sure why we need this. The only thing that is giving me any sense of hope here is that John August is obviously a very talented and very smart guy. He hosts a podcast called Script Notes that is all about screenwriting. He clearly knows that this sounds like a stupid idea. So unless this is just a cash grab, I'm hoping he has some sort of pitch here that would make things interesting. But it's very, very difficult to understand from this point how this could be a good idea.
Chris, are you a fan of Grease?
Oh, absolutely not. Grease is awful. So, no.
Jacob, I know you like musicals.
I love musicals. I think Grease is a bad musical. I do think the live version Fox did a few years ago is actually genuinely amazing. Like from a technical point of view, I've watched it like 3 times because I'm amazed at how they pulled it off. And the songs suck, the characters suck, the stories suck, and as Ben said, John August is a really terrific writer. But this entire movie is summed up in a 3-minute song at the start of the first movie. So who cares? I don't care.
I don't think we need a Grease prequel. So I think we've all weighed in this. We don't need a Grease prequel.
No.
I mean, I do have faith in John August. I like John August. One of my favorite films of all time is his movie Go, which he wrote. And he tends to write some good stuff, even even when he's, dealing with like big budget Tim Burton movies, he creates some great stuff. But I feel like, does anybody even care about this movie or a prequel?
The audience for Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. People want prequels, the musicals no one asked for.
I think you hit the nail on the hammer there. I think it's probably the success of that movie that got this greenlit. So, okay, let's talk about one last thing. I know we're going over time here, but we're going to be inundated by stuff later this week. We have Star Wars Celebration, which is starting today. We have this Disney investors call that they're going to announce all this Disney Plus stuff later today, so we won't get to this if we don't talk about it now. There was a story about J.J. Abrams in the magazine Fast Company. They did basically a profile on him, but it revealed a few bits about Star Wars Episode 9, including how is it going to respond to Rian Johnson's Last Jedi, because as you know, I think Rian Johnson's Last Jedi kind of takes some swerves from where I think JJ probably originally had planned to, had laid out the train tracks. He had, so what I'm wondering, Ben, is what did we learn from this article in terms of that?
Yeah, I'm just going to read his quote here and then we can talk about it. He said, "I had some gut instincts about where the story would have gone, but without getting in the weeds on episode 8, that was a story that Ryan wrote and was telling based on 7 before we met. So he was taking the thing in another direction. So we also had to respond to episode 8. So our movie was not just following what we had started, it was following what he had started and then, or what we had started and then had been advanced by someone else. So there was that, and finally it was resolving 9 movies. And this is the really interesting part. While there were some threads of larger ideas and some big picture things that had been conceived decades ago, and a lot of ideas that Lawrence Kasdan and I had while we were doing episode 7, the lack of absolute inevitability, the lack of a complete structure for this thing, given the way it was being run, was an enormous challenge." So that's his quote there.
Now this infuriates me. Even him admitting that there's a lack of a complete structure when going into this trilogy is so infuriating. And I know he's possibly to blame for this. And Kathleen Kennedy. I mean, I'm sure Kathleen Kennedy was, giving the reins to any, the filmmakers that were involved here, giving free rein. That is a good thing. Having artistic freedom, yes, that's great. But I wish that when JJ made Force Awakens that there was some kind of outline for this trilogy or some kind of, broad strokes. You need a showrunner for these things. I think I've gone on enough about this, but what do you guys think from these comments? It sounds like he's basically admitting to it here.
Yeah, I think so. And he's saying the thing that really interests me is the stuff where he talks about, these big picture things that had been conceived decades ago, how he seems to be implying that he incorporated some of those ideas into this movie. So I wonder if there's all sorts of stuff that's been written about what George Lucas originally intended for these 3 movies back when they were, twinkles in his eye. And I'm wondering if by
the way, George Lucas, as much as he said he had a plan, he didn't have a plan. So, I mean, and those worked out. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and Abrams is such a purist and such a pop storyteller that I wonder if he is going to sort of go out of his way to sort of incorporate as much of that stuff as he can into this movie. And he is also a big, I know he loves crowd pleasing stuff, and the fandom of Star Wars is very loud and has made it very clear the kind of stuff that they want to see. So I don't know. This quote, I'm a little worried about it because, as everybody knows, I loved The Last Jedi, and I feel like the original direction that Rian Johnson took that movie in, it was like a breath of fresh air for the Star Wars franchise. And it sounds like Abrams is just going to sort of, take another turn back toward what he had all along. But Jacob, Chris, what do you guys think?
Let me say this. My expectations for the new Star Wars film are at an all-time low. I'm going to see it, obviously. I hope it turns out really well, but I feel like so much of what J.J. Abrams has been saying, ever since he took this gig, has been suggesting he just wants to kind of just ignore everything in The Last Jedi. And while that might make some people online very happy, it does not make me happy at all. So I'm not really looking forward to that if that's the case. But I hope I'm not right there, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think J.J. Abrams is a filmmaker whose heart is always in the right place. I do not doubt his talent or enthusiasm, but I share Chris's wariness, even though I am more optimistic than he is.
And we should say that he did say that it's going to address The Last Jedi. It wasn't like, I mean, I know Chris is reading between the lines here, but it does sound like if you read the quote, he is saying that it is going to take into account the changes that Ryan put into Last Jedi, right?
Yeah, but I really don't want it to be him being like, all that stuff was not true. Like it was fake. Like I really don't want that to happen. And if it does,
I don't think that's going to happen. I think Snoke is dead. I think you do have Rey, who was told, about her parents from an unreliable narrator. That could be different, because we do agree that like that is not set in stone, even in that movie. I think. Yeah, but that's Ryan Johnson said that.
That's one of my favorite parts of The Last Jedi. That whole scene where she, is told she's from nothing. Like I love that idea. That's so much cooler to me than some dumb like bloodline thing, like, oh, you're Luke's secret daughter. That's so dull to me. Like I'm so much more excited by her just being, a quote unquote nobody who becomes this hero. That's so much more interesting to me, but I don't know.
Well, I predict it's going to be something in between, Chris. I predict it's not going to be she's Luke's secret daughter, and it's also not going to be that she was a nobody. So we'll have to see. Maybe we'll get some hints of that tomorrow as the trailer hits online. Let's talk about one last thing, and that is that J.J. Abrams almost turned down Episode 9. Chris, you wrote about this for the site. What do we know?
J.J. Abrams, he in this interview, he was talking about how he was almost ready to move on to a new project when Kathleen Kennedy called him up. This was after Colin Trevorrow was either left on his own or was fired, depending on who you ask, from Episode 9. And Kathleen Kennedy said, do you want to come back and make Episode 9? And J.J. Abrams says his initial knee-jerk reaction was to just say no. Like, he didn't want to do it. And he said his reasoning behind that was he was so worried that he would screw up The Force Awakens. And, for almost everyone's opinion, he didn't do that. The film is pretty much well received by critics. Fans seem to like it. And he felt like, he dodged a bullet, and he was sort of worried that he's sort of like tempting fate to come back and do the movie again, and he might not dodge that bullet again. But he also added that, his wife sort of put it in perspective and told him it was a chance to, finish what he started essentially with the first film. And so he came back. But once again, the fact that his original reaction was like, ugh, I don't want to do that, is another thing that makes me nervous about this movie. So we'll see.
Yeah. And there's also the time constraints. This movie had a release date and, didn't have a script. They threw out the Colin Trevorrow script. I will put a link in the show notes to Ben's article on that, so you can read his other hesitations of why he almost turned down Star Wars Episode 9 there. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can read all the stories we talked about in today's podcast linked in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, question, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page, write us a good review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow or maybe even later today with some Disney stuff. We'll see.